The gray light filtered through the narrow windows of Oakwood State Prison like a reluctant visitor, as though even the sun was hesitant to witness the events unfolding within. Marcus Johnson lay shackled to a steel bed in the secure wing, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. He hadn't slept in days. By sunrise, prison officials would move him to the final holding cell, and 2 hours later, they planned to administer the lethal injection that would end his life. No friends or family had been allowed to visit in weeks. Only the occasional comfort from Reverend Phillips, the prison chaplain. Yet through it all, Marcus clung to one enduring wish. "I'd like to see Shadow before I die," he repeated to the guard standing outside his cell. Shadow was his German shepherd, a loyal companion he'd adopted 3 years before his arrest. Marcus had loved that dog more than life itself. Warden Ramirez stepped into view, her posture stiff but not unkind. "Johnson, final requests are subject to approval. Bringing an animal onto prison grounds isn't standard protocol. We don't even know where the dog is." "I do," Marcus interrupted, his voice scratchy from disuse. "Shadow has been with Michelle Griggs, my fiancée. She still has him, as far as I know." He tried to keep his tone neutral, but the ache in his throat betrayed him. "Please, Warden, if there's any mercy left in this system, let me see Shadow." She regarded him with a sympathy she tried to mask behind professional detachment. "I'll see what I can do, but don't get your hopes up." Marcus nodded. He was too tired to fight or beg. In truth, he still clung to a thread of defiance, a refusal to accept that he had murdered anyone. For 5 years, Marcus had shouted his innocence to anyone who would listen. After multiple appeals, no one believed him, except perhaps Reverend Phillips, who had admitted doubt on more than one occasion. Before we go any further, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our community of storytellers dedicated to Black voices and experiences. Now back to our story. As the warden departed, Marcus heard conversation outside. "Another protest forming," one guard said. "Half of them think he's guilty as sin. The other half want the death penalty abolished entirely." Marcus shut his eyes. It didn't matter what outsiders believed. In a few hours, the needle would do its grim work. He eased himself off the bunk and felt chains clink around his ankles. With every shift of his weight, they rattled, a constant reminder of his confinement. He walked to the small window, a high rectangular slit, and tried to see the sky. A watery band of light was all that showed. Dawn was still weak, but its pinkish hue spread across the horizon. It reminded him painfully of the early mornings he used to spend walking Shadow through the vacant streets of Pine Ridge. For a moment, Marcus could almost feel Shadow pulling on the leash, could see the German shepherd's tail wagging excitedly as they set off for the park. He recalled how the dog would run circles around him, prompting strangers to smile. "You train him yourself?" they would ask. Proudly, Marcus would answer, "Yes." Shadow had been brilliant, eager to please. The German shepherd had been more than a pet. He'd been a lifeline, especially after returning from his second tour in Afghanistan with nightmares that wouldn't fade. A guard knocked on the door. "Johnson, time to go. They're moving you to the final holding cell. Warden wants you prepped." Marcus swallowed hard. "Am I getting my last wish?" The guard avoided his gaze. "All I know is they're checking with the Department of Corrections. Don't hold your breath." Nodding, Marcus turned around and silently offered his wrists for the cuffs. He was used to it by now. After so many years of confinement, the mechanical click of metal on metal felt almost routine. "Let's move," the guard said. Marcus cast one final look at that stingy band of morning light, wondering if he'd ever see the sun fully break over the horizon again. Michelle Griggs parked her pickup truck outside the small townhouse she now rented. It was just after 6 a.m., and she had been awake all night. The swirling anxiety in her chest had started ever since she saw the news broadcast. Marcus Johnson's execution was scheduled for that morning. Inside the townhouse, Shadow lay curled on a dog bed, his black and tan coat gleaming in the early light. At the sound of Michelle's footsteps, he lifted his head, ears perked up. Shadow had not seen Marcus since the trial 5 years ago. Michelle's heart clenched at the sight of the dog's alert gaze. Shadow was all that remained of the life she and Marcus had started building. An engagement ring, wedding invitations half addressed, an apartment they were about to move into. Then everything shattered the night police found Marcus near the murder scene and pinned the blame on him. She crouched and stroked Shadow's head. "You miss him, don't you?" "I know you do." Despite everything, she never doubted Marcus's innocence. The evidence had been bizarre. A partial fingerprint on a weapon, unconfirmed sightings from questionable witnesses, and an alleged financial motive that never made sense. But a convincingly delivered prosecution sealed Marcus's fate. She had spent years trying to gain traction on an appeal, to no avail. Today was the day Marcus was set to die by lethal injection. She'd pleaded with the new district attorney to re-examine the case. She'd tried contacting journalists who covered racial justice issues. Nothing had worked. Her phone buzzed. Startled, she snatched it up. The number was from Oakwood Prison. "Hello, Miss Griggs." A woman's voice, calm, official. "Warden Ramirez here. I'm calling about Marcus Johnson's final request." Michelle's skin prickled. "Is there any change? I heard the governor might." "I'm sorry," Ramirez cut in. No stays or delays. The execution will move forward, but Mr. Johnson has requested to see his dog, Shadow, one last time. He says Shadow is in your care." Michelle nearly dropped the phone. "He still wants to see Shadow?" "Yes. We've never done this before, but I received conditional approval from the Department of Corrections. We're short on time, though." The warden sighed. "We need you and the dog here within 90 minutes, or it won't happen." Michelle's pulse thundered in her ears. "I'll bring him." "Absolutely. We'll leave in 5 minutes." She hung up and stared at Shadow, who was now standing, tail wagging because he sensed her excitement. But she also saw the apprehension in his eyes, maybe picking up on her anxiety. She tried to summon courage. "Come on, boy. Let's go see Marcus." For a moment, her voice wavered. She forced a brittle smile, knowing that no matter how impossible it felt, she had to do this. This was everything Marcus had left. One final connection to a world that had once offered them both a promise of happiness. The engine hummed as Michelle sped toward Oakwood State Prison, pushing the speed limit on mostly empty roads. Dawn was brightening the eastern sky, painting clouds with swirls of pink and orange. She risked a glance at Shadow in the passenger seat. The German shepherd stared out the window, occasionally letting out a soft whine as if he sensed the gravity of what awaited them. Her phone kept buzzing, calls from friends, perhaps people who had seen the news. She ignored them. Right now, only one thing mattered: honoring Marcus's request. Michelle's mind drifted to the first day she met Marcus Johnson, 5 years ago at a Veterans Outreach event. He had been standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, Shadow sitting obediently at his feet. Unlike many of the other veterans who wore their military affiliation proudly on caps or jackets, Marcus had dressed simply in jeans and a blue button-down shirt. "Is he friendly?" she had asked, gesturing to Shadow. Marcus's face had softened immediately. "The friendliest. Unless you're a squirrel." That unexpected touch of humor from a man who seemed so reserved had caught her attention. She learned later that Marcus had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Army Rangers, earning multiple commendations for valor. What he didn't talk about, at least not right away, were the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way loud noises could send him spiraling back to combat zones. Shadow had been his salvation. Marcus had adopted the dog from a shelter 6 months after returning home. The German shepherd was technically a service animal, trained to respond to signs of anxiety and nightmares, but he was also family. Together, they had built a new routine: morning runs, evening walks, quiet moments when the world felt too loud. Shadow would press his weight against Marcus's legs when he sensed tension, a silent reminder: "You're home. You're safe." By the time Michelle entered their lives, Marcus had stabilized. He had a good job with a security firm, his PTSD was manageable, and he'd started volunteering with other veterans. They fell in love quickly, deeply. Their relationship was built on quiet moments and honest conversations. Shadow had accepted Michelle immediately, as though giving his blessing to their union. Now, As she pulled up to the imposing gates of Oakwood Prison, Michelle felt a cold dread in her stomach. Two sets of gates parted slowly, controlled by watchful guards in a booth. She was waved through to a side entrance and directed to park. "Wait here," an officer instructed, "until we confirm everything inside." Michelle reached over and gave Shadow a comforting pat. "Just a little longer, boy. You'll see him soon." Shadow pressed his muzzle into her hand, as if to say he understood. She closed her eyes, imagining what it would be like to stand in front of Marcus again. How gaunt would he look? Would his eyes still hold that gentle humor she had fallen in love with? Would he still smell like the aftershave he used to wear? Michelle realized tears were streaming down her face. She wiped them hurriedly. Right now, she had to stay strong for Marcus's sake and for Shadow's. If you find value in these stories that highlight the human cost of our criminal justice system, please subscribe. Your support allows us to continue sharing these powerful narratives that might otherwise go untold. Back to our story. The door to the administrative wing opened, and a different guard emerged, signaling for Michelle to follow. This was it. She took Shadow's leash, heart pounding as they were led through a series of sterile corridors. The German shepherd seemed to understand the gravity of the situation, walking with unusual composure at her side. Finally, they reached a small, windowless room. Warden Ramirez stood outside, her expression unreadable. "Miss Griggs, Mr. Johnson has been informed you're here. I must remind you that this is unprecedented. You'll have 15 minutes. No physical contact beyond an initial greeting. The dog must remain leashed at all times." Michelle nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "Ready?" the warden asked. Another nod. Ramirez opened the door. Marcus sat on a narrow bunk, wearing a prison-issued uniform that hung loose on his frame. He looked up, and when his eyes met Michelle's, something broke inside her. Then Shadow saw him. The German shepherd's entire body went rigid. He let out a single loud bark, followed by a flurry of frantic tail wagging. Marcus's breath caught. Shadow bounded forward, nails clacking on the tile floor as he tried to leap onto the bunk. He let out a series of excited barks, half yelp, half cry, a sound of pure joy that Michelle recognized from happier days. A guard was about to hold the dog back, but Ramirez waved him off. Marcus, tears streaming, dropped to his knees on the floor. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, hugging Shadow around the neck. The German shepherd was bigger now, his muzzle bearing a faint white streak that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But his eyes shone with the same adoration Marcus remembered. Michelle stood trembling by the doorway. Marcus looked up at her. "Michelle," he murmured. No words could suffice. In a single glance, she saw all the pain he had endured, visits she had been forced to end, the heartbreak of losing a life they'd planned together. "I tried to stop this," Michelle whispered. "I begged them to look again. No one would listen. I'm sorry, Marcus." He shook his head. "Don't. You did more than anyone." Warden Ramirez cleared her throat. "We have 15 minutes, she said, sounding gentler than before. "The chaplain will come afterward, and then the doctor." "I'm sorry, Johnson." Marcus tried to swallow the lump in his throat. "I appreciate you letting me see him," he managed to say. Michelle knelt on the other side of Shadow, who was busy licking Marcus's face. She reached out, and Marcus grasped her hand. For a moment, they simply absorbed the reality of being in the same room after so long. Neither had the words to convey that mixture of heartbreak and longing. "He's still yours," Michelle said softly. "I never rehomed him, even though people told me it was best to move on." Marcus buried his face in Shadow's fur, inhaling the familiar scent that used to greet him at the door after a long shift at work. While an emotional reunion unfolded at Oakwood Prison, Detective Anthony Davis sat in his modest apartment across town, unable to sleep. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, and his sharp hazel eyes betrayed a lifetime of secrets. For 3 decades, he had served as a detective. Now, with retirement just around the corner, he'd been saddled with a regret that wouldn't let him rest. For 5 years, a case had been gnawing at him: Marcus Johnson's murder conviction. Davis was the detective who had led the investigation that put Marcus on death row. Back then, the evidence had seemed open and shut. Partial fingerprints on the murder weapon, a suspicious bank deposit near the time of the victim's death, and ambiguous eyewitness accounts that placed Marcus at the scene. But in the last 2 years, Davis's old partner had confided doubts. Something about the way certain testimonies were coached, how the victim's history had vanished from official records, how certain digital traces were never pursued. The partner claimed the puzzle was never truly solved or possibly rigged. The city believed Davis to be a hero detective, a man of unwavering justice. But as Marcus's execution date neared, Davis found himself visiting the dusty archives of the county courthouse at odd hours, rereading transcripts, rewatching interrogation videos. Each time, details pricked at his conscience. The timeline didn't perfectly align. The victim, a businessman named Thomas Richardson, had a host of enemies, some with stronger motives than Marcus. And that suspicious bank deposit in Marcus's account, it was never fully tracked to a source. The prosecution claimed it was payment for the murder, but no proof existed. Davis's cell phone chirped, snapping him back to the present. He read the text: Johnson's final appeal denied. Execution set for 9 a.m. If there's anything left to do, do it now. The message came from a friend still inside the district attorney's office. A sense of dread tugged at Davis. He had considered stepping forward with his doubts, but never mustered the nerve. He'd tried quietly asking higher-ups to recheck the forensics. They brushed him off. For them, the conviction was a victory, a done deal. The city's justice system saw an open-and-shut case with a dangerous man locked away. After all, some of the biggest players in local government were Richardson's associates. Richardson had been a real estate magnate with money in every politician's pocket. They mourned him as a saint, ignoring any possible unsavory side ventures he ran. The city wanted a scapegoat, and Marcus Johnson, a black man with PTSD and a sketchy past, according to the prosecution's portrayal, fit the role perfectly. Now, standing alone in his bedroom, Davis checked his watch. 7:20 a.m., less than 2 hours remained before the execution. He picked up a phone he rarely used, a prepaid device purchased for privacy. He dialed a number from memory. Yeah, came a voice, low and slightly gruff. It's Davis. Listen, I need you to do me a favor. We don't have much time. Marcus Johnson sat alone in the holding cell, a small antiseptic space with white-tiled walls and glaring fluorescent light overhead. Shadow and Michelle had been escorted out, 15 precious minutes gone too quickly. He stared at the sterile walls, wondering how many other men had sat in this same cell, waiting for death to claim them. If these injustices move you, if you believe these stories deserve to be told, please subscribe. Your support helps shed light on cases that might otherwise remain in shadows. Now back to our story. Detective Anthony Davis was racing against time. The call he placed to his contact, a data specialist known for retrieving digital footprints, had yielded promising leads. Though it might be too little, too late, Davis couldn't stand by while an innocent man died. Digital transfers confirmed from Richardson's offshore accounts, his contact reported. Large sums moved through shell corporations the week before his murder. They point to a known fixer, Victor Hayes. Davis's pulse quickened. Hayes was a shadowy figure who specialized in making problems disappear for wealthy clients. If Hayes was connected to Richardson's murder, that opened an entirely different avenue of investigation, one that had never been explored during Marcus's trial. Any proof Hayes was in Pine Ridge when Richardson died? Davis asked. Working on it. His burner phones pinged towers near Richardson's penthouse that night. Timeline matches the estimated time of death. Davis gripped the steering wheel of his unmarked sedan as he sped toward the county courthouse. He needed physical evidence to corroborate this digital trail, something tangible that could convince officials to delay the execution. The detective recalled the day he interviewed Marcus 5 years ago. The suspect had looked genuinely bewildered, even frightened. I didn't do this. Marcus had insisted with a calmness that was either the mark of a psychopath or an innocent man who believed in the system's fairness. Over the years, Davis had interrogated all kinds of criminals. Marcus's demeanor never quite matched the hardened or deceptive type. He had no prior record, had received an honorable discharge from the military, and held a stable job at a security firm. Then came the abrupt downfall. Pulling into the courthouse parking lot, Davis headed straight for the records room. The clerk was reluctant at first, but Davis's badge and urgent demeanor convinced him to retrieve the archived case files. "Sign here," the clerk said, pushing forward several boxes of dusty materials. Davis carried them to an empty conference room and began sifting through documents, photographs, and transcripts. Most were familiar. He had built the case, after all. But then he found something unexpected, a folder labeled Crime Scene Forensic Analysis 2, dated 3 days after the murder. He frowned. Davis only remembered one official forensic report being introduced at trial. He opened the folder and began reading. Partial footprints unaccounted for, not matching Marcus Johnson or the victim. Signs of forced entry from a window leading to the fire escape. Traces of gunpowder residue not consistent with the discovered murder weapon. Davis's blood ran cold. Richardson had been stabbed to death. Where did gunpowder residue come from? And why wasn't this report ever introduced as evidence? At the bottom of the page, a handwritten note read, "Due to chain of custody issues, these samples deemed inconclusive and not forwarded to primary case file." This pointed to a potential second assailant, or at least an alternate method of assault. If Richardson had been threatened with a firearm before being stabbed, it drastically changed the narrative and suggested multiple perpetrators. Davis quickly photographed the documents with his phone, sending them to his contact. "Cross-reference these findings with Hayes's known methods," he texted, "and check if any of Richardson's associates had reason to want him dead." His phone buzzed almost immediately. Already on it, Richardson was planning to testify in a federal investigation into real estate fraud. Several powerful people would benefit from his silence. Davis checked his watch. 8:15 a.m., less than an hour remained before Marcus's scheduled execution. He needed to get to Oakwood Prison immediately. As he gathered the documents, the conference room door opened. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Kendall stood there, arms crossed. "What are you doing with those files, Davis?" she asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Davis straightened. "Finding evidence that we convicted the wrong man for Richardson's murder." Her expression hardened. "Those files were sealed after the final appeal." "Because someone wanted to bury the truth," Davis countered, holding up the second forensic report. "Did you know about this? Evidence of multiple assailants, signs of forced entry that contradicted our timeline, gunpowder residue that was never explained." Kendall stepped closer, examining the report with widening eyes. "I never saw this." "Someone made sure you didn't," Davis said. "And now Marcus Johnson is scheduled to die in 45 minutes for a crime he didn't commit." Kendall's professional demeanor wavered. "You need more than just a misplaced report to stop an execution." "I have more," Davis said, showing her his phone. Digital evidence linking professional hitman Victor Hayes to Richardson's murder. Hayes was near the penthouse that night, making calls that ended abruptly around the time of death. And Richardson was about to turn state's evidence in a federal investigation. Kendall paled. "If this is true," "It is, and we need to act now." To Davis's surprise, Kendall nodded. "I'll call the governor's office directly. You get to Oakwood and talk to Warden Ramirez." Davis gathered the documents and rushed out, hope rising for the first time in years. Perhaps they could still prevent a terrible miscarriage of justice. Meanwhile, in his holding cell, Marcus Johnson was meeting with Reverend Phillips. The chaplain had brought a small Bible and was offering quiet prayers that Marcus only half heard. His mind kept returning to Shadow, the weight of the dog leaning against him, the familiar smell of his fur, the unconditional love in those eyes. At least he'd had that final moment of connection. A sudden commotion in the hallway made both men look up. The door clicked open, and Warden Ramirez appeared, speaking in quick, hushed tones to a guard. She turned to Marcus, her expression tense, but with a hint of something new, uncertainty. "Johnson, we've received new information that could question your involvement in Richardson's murder. On that basis, I've secured a short postponement of the injection. 2 hours starting now." Marcus froze, scarcely able to process her words. "Postponement? What does that mean?" "It means you're not dying at 9 o'clock. The procedure is on hold until 11 o'clock. We need to verify the authenticity of new financial records and forensic evidence that may indicate you were framed. If they check out, the governor could grant a formal stay and open an investigation. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. Are you serious? I've been saying I was innocent from the start. Now finally someone believes me. Ramirez exhaled. This is not confirmation of innocence yet, but we have reason to doubt the validity of your conviction. Detective Davis is pushing for a thorough review. A guard appeared, pressing a phone receiver into Ramirez's hand. She answered, stepping aside while Marcus tried to absorb this sudden shift in his reality. He might live, at least for a few more hours. He glanced at Reverend Phillips, who seemed equally stunned. The chaplain squeezed Marcus's shoulder. This could be the miracle we prayed for, he whispered. Outside Oakwood Prison, Michelle sat in her truck, unable to leave after saying goodbye to Marcus. Shadow lay in the back seat, occasionally whining softly. Her phone rang, an unknown number. Hello, she answered cautiously. Miss Griggs? This is Detective Anthony Davis. I'm heading to Oakwood Prison with evidence that might exonerate Marcus. Don't leave yet. Michelle's breath caught. What kind of evidence? A suppressed forensic report and financial records linking a professional hitman to Richardson's murder. Marcus was framed, and I can prove it. Tears sprang to Michelle's eyes. I've always known he was innocent. I should have looked deeper years ago, Davis admitted, regret heavy in his voice. I'm trying to make it right now. Meet me at the administrative entrance in 10 minutes. Michelle hung up, a cautious hope blooming in her chest. She turned to look at Shadow in the back seat. Did you hear that, boy? There might be a chance after all. The German shepherd tilted his head, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. His tail thumped against the seat, once, twice. A small gesture that, to Michelle, felt like a confirmation of hope. The administrative wing of Oakwood Prison buzzed with unusual activity. Detective Anthony Davis stood in Warden Ramirez's office, spreading documents across her desk while Michelle Griggs watched from a corner chair, her hands trembling with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The suppressed forensic report shows clear evidence of multiple perpetrators, Davis explained, pointing to key paragraphs. Footprints that don't match Marcus or Richardson, gunpowder residue that was never explained, and signs of forced entry that contradict our original timeline. Warden Ramirez studied the documents, her expression grave. And you can prove this report was deliberately withheld during trial? The chain of custody documentation shows it was submitted to the DA's office, but never forwarded to the defense, Davis confirmed. Someone buried it. Michelle leaned forward. Who would do that? And why? Davis pulled out his phone, showing them text messages from his digital forensics contact. Richardson was about to become an informant in a federal investigation into real estate fraud. Several powerful people in this city stood to lose everything if he testified. And the connection to Victor Hayes? Ramirez asked. Hayes is a professional fixer known for eliminating problems for wealthy clients. His phone records place him within half a mile of Richardson's penthouse during the estimated time of death. The calls stop abruptly at 11:48 p.m., around when Richardson was killed. The warden's desk phone rang. She answered, listened intently, then hung up. The governor's office wants more concrete evidence linking Hayes directly to the murder scene before they'll grant a full stay, she reported. They're willing to extend the postponement to noon, but that's all. Michelle stood up, her voice urgent. That's only 3 more hours. Davis nodded grimly. I need access to Richardson's personal effects from the crime scene, specifically his phone. If Hayes contacted him directly, we might find proof. I'll call the evidence lockup, Ramirez responded, already dialing. While they worked, Marcus Johnson sat in his holding cell, caught in an emotional limbo. The postponement had spared him from immediate death, but the uncertainty was its own form of torture. Would he live past noon, or was this just delaying the inevitable? Shadow had been brought back to keep him company during the wait. The German shepherd lay beside the bunk, his warm presence a silent comfort. Marcus stroked the dog's head, focused on the rhythm of Shadow's breathing to steady his own racing heart. A guard appeared at the door. Johnson, Detective Davis wants to ask you some questions. Marcus nodded, and moments later, Davis entered the cell. The detective's face showed strain, but also determination. "I need to know," Davis began. "Did you ever meet Thomas Richardson before his murder?" Marcus shook his head. "Never. I told you that 5 years ago, and the money transferred to your account. $5,000 the day after Richardson died. I had no idea where it came from. I thought it was a banking error. I was going to report it, but I was arrested before I could." Davis nodded, making notes. "One more thing. Did you ever own a knife similar to the murder weapon?" "Yes, a hunting knife from my military days. But it was stolen from my truck about a month before the murder. I filed a police report." Davis's eyes widened. "You filed a report?" "That was never mentioned in the trial. Because no one looked for it," Marcus replied, a hint of bitterness in his voice. Davis jotted this down, his expression grim. "We're doing everything we can to stop this, Johnson. I know it doesn't make up for 5 years, but just find the truth," Marcus interrupted. "That's all I've wanted from the beginning." After Davis left, Marcus turned back to Shadow, who had sat up, alert to the tension in the room. "What do you think, boy? Do we have a chance?" Shadow's tail thumped against the floor, once, twice. What Marcus is experiencing reflects a painful reality many wrongfully convicted individuals face. Do you know of anyone who has been through or still going through something similar? Please share your experience in the comments below. Also, take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't done so. These narratives need to be heard, and your support makes that possible. Now, back to our story. In the evidence lockup across town, Davis carefully examined Richardson's personal effects. His contact had managed to hack into the businessman's cloud accounts, revealing a trove of deleted emails. One thread stood out: exchanges with an anonymous account discussing cleaning house and removing obstacles. The final message, sent the day before Richardson's murder, contained just 2 words: tomorrow night. Davis's phone buzzed with an incoming call from his contact. "I've got Hayes," the voice announced without preamble. "Facial recognition from a security camera 2 blocks from Richardson's building. Timestamp is 11:32 p.m., 17 minutes before the estimated time of death." "Send it to me now," Davis ordered, his pulse racing. Back at Oakwood, Warden Ramirez was fielding calls from the governor's office, the district attorney, and the press. The story of Marcus Johnson's postponed execution had leaked, and media vans were gathering outside the prison gates. At 11:15 a.m., just 45 minutes before the extended deadline, Davis burst into the warden's office, followed by Assistant DA Sarah Kendall. "We have Hayes on camera near the murder scene," Davis announced, displaying the grainy but unmistakable image on his tablet. "And we found the police report Marcus filed about his stolen knife a month before the murder, a report that mysteriously vanished from our database." Kendall stepped forward. "I've reviewed all the evidence Detective Davis has gathered. The state no longer has confidence in Marcus Johnson's conviction. I'm formally requesting a complete stay of execution pending a full investigation." The warden immediately called the governor's office, relaying the new findings. After a tense conversation, she hung up and turned to Michelle, who had been waiting anxiously. "The governor has granted a full stay," Ramirez announced. "The execution is called off indefinitely while we investigate. If the evidence is as compelling as it appears, Mr. Johnson's conviction could be vacated entirely." Michelle covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "He's not going to die today?" "No," Ramirez confirmed. "Not today. Not for this." The news was delivered to Marcus, who sat motionless on his bunk, unable to process the reprieve. Shadow sensed the shift in emotion and began licking Marcus's hand excitedly. "I don't have to die," Marcus whispered, looking up at Reverend Phillips, who had returned to be with him during what they thought were his final hours. "No, son," the chaplain confirmed, his own eyes moist. "God has granted you more time." Over the next week, the investigation accelerated. With Davis leading the charge, they located Victor Hayes hiding in a neighboring state. Under pressure and facing multiple charges, Hayes confessed to Richardson's murder, admitting he had been hired by a consortium of real estate developers who feared Richardson's cooperation with federal authorities. Hayes also revealed how he had stolen Marcus's knife weeks before the murder, specifically to frame him. Marcus had been chosen as a scapegoat because of his PTSD history, which the conspirators believed would make him an easy target for suspicion. 9 days after the state execution, Marcus Johnson stood before Judge Eleanor Williams in a hastily convened hearing. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and curious citizens. Based on the overwhelming new evidence and the confession of the actual perpetrator, Judge Williams declared, "This court vacates the conviction of Marcus Johnson and orders his immediate release. Mr. Johnson, on behalf of the state, I offer our profound apologies for this grave miscarriage of justice." The gavel's sound echoed through the courtroom, sealing Marcus's freedom. Michelle rushed forward, embracing him as camera flashes captured the moment. Outside, Shadow waited in Michelle's truck, unaware that his world was about to change again, this time for the better. As Marcus stepped into the sunlight, a free man for the first time in 5 years, he was struck by both the familiarity and strangeness of the world. Cars seemed sleeker, phones thinner, fashions different. But the sky was the same blue, the sun equally warm on his skin. That night, in Michelle's small house, Marcus sat on the floor beside Shadow, who refused to leave his side. The German shepherd pressed against him, head on his knee, as if afraid Marcus might disappear again. "I don't know how to start over," Marcus admitted quietly to Michelle. 5 years, everything's different now. Michelle sat beside him, taking his hand. "We'll figure it out together, day by day." Marcus nodded, burying his free hand in Shadow's fur. The dog's steady presence anchored him to this new reality, one where he might finally have a future again. 1 month after Marcus Johnson's release, the morning sun shone upon River Park's walking trail. Marcus stood with Shadow's leash in hand, gazing at the water glinting under golden rays. Michelle walked beside him, a gentle breeze lifting her hair. For the first time since his exoneration, they decided to revisit a spot that once symbolized their dreams, the riverside park where they'd walked Shadow daily before everything went wrong. Marcus inhaled the crisp air. He wore a plain t-shirt and jeans, feeling the simple pleasure of existing without walls around him. Shadow trotted along the gravel path, tail swishing from side to side, occasionally pausing to sniff wildflowers or watch birds skimming over the water's surface. "You okay?" Michelle asked, noticing his contemplative expression. He nodded, eyes reflecting the sunlight. "I still have nightmares, but this helps, being out here with you and Shadow." She smiled, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. "We're thinking of adopting another dog so Shadow can have a friend," she teased, recalling a plan they'd once had. "Maybe we'll settle one thing at a time," Marcus replied with a soft laugh, a sound that was becoming less rare as weeks passed. In the distance, Detective Davis approached, wearing casual clothes and a tentative smile. He'd asked to join them, part of his personal journey toward atonement. "Morning," the detective called, raising a hand in greeting. Marcus nodded, the tension he once felt at seeing Davis now replaced with cautious acceptance. In the past month, they'd built an unexpected bridge of understanding. Davis had been instrumental not just in freeing Marcus, but in bringing the true perpetrators to justice. The final indictments came down yesterday, Davis reported as he fell into step beside them. Hayes gave testimony against the entire consortium. 3 business partners who conspired with Richardson before turning against him are facing charges for orchestrating his murder and your framing. Marcus exhaled a breath of relief. "So it's over then?" Davis shrugged. "The big players are done. But the system that allowed this to happen? That's going to take longer to fix." They walked in silence for a moment, each lost in thought. Shadow led the way, occasionally looking back as if to ensure everyone was following. "The State Compensation Board approved your settlement," Michelle mentioned. "It's not nearly enough for 5 years of your life, but it will help us start over." Marcus nodded. "Money isn't everything, but it'll help us get a place with a yard for Shadow." He paused, watching a family with children pass by. "I've been thinking about what to do next. Maybe set up a foundation to help others wrongfully convicted, especially Black men who don't have the resources to fight back." Michelle reached for his hand. "I think that's a wonderful idea. I'd like to help, Davis offered quietly. If you'd allow it. My retirement starts next month, and I could volunteer. Help review cases, connect with investigators willing to look deeper. Marcus studied the detective's face, seeing genuine remorse and determination. I'd appreciate that, he said finally. We need people on the inside who are willing to question the system. They continued walking, Shadow leading them around a bend in the trail where the river widened into a small lake. Sunlight danced across the water's surface, creating patterns of light and shadow. A metaphor, Marcus thought, for the complexity of justice, never as clear-cut as it should be. One evening, while sitting on the porch of their new rental home, a modest place with a fenced yard where Shadow could run freely, Marcus received a letter. The return address showed it was from Reverend Phillips at Oakwood Prison. Inside was a note and a newspaper clipping about Marcus's foundation, which had already helped secure new hearings for 2 inmates with credible claims of innocence. You turned your pain into purpose, the chaplain had written. That's the truest form of redemption. Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in a box where he kept reminders of his journey, both the painful past and the hopeful present. Beside him, Shadow dozed peacefully, occasionally twitching in dreams that Marcus hoped were pleasant ones. Michelle joined him, 2 mugs of tea in hand. Thinking about tomorrow's interview, she asked, referring to his scheduled appearance on a national news program to discuss wrongful convictions and racial bias in the justice system. Just gathering my thoughts, he replied. It's still hard to talk about, but staying silent won't help others still fighting inside. She nodded, understanding the weight he carried. You're giving them a voice. Marcus gazed at the sunset, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Without you and Shadow, I wouldn't have survived this, he said quietly. You never stopped believing in me. Michelle's eyes glistened. You never left my heart, no matter how bleak it got. Shadow stirred, sensing the emotion in Marcus's voice. The German shepherd rose and pressed his muzzle against Marcus's hand, a gesture that had comforted him through countless difficult moments. As darkness fell, Marcus reflected on how far he had come and how far he still had to go. The nightmares hadn't stopped, the anger hadn't completely subsided, and the lost years could never be reclaimed. But something else had taken root alongside the pain, a determination to prevent others from suffering the same fate. The next morning, Marcus stood at the river's edge once more, Shadow at his side. The German shepherd splashed in the shallows, playfully chasing minnows. Marcus smiled, watching Shadow's unbridled joy, a reminder that even after the darkest confinement, freedom could still be embraced with wholehearted enthusiasm. Detective Davis had called earlier with news that another case they were reviewing showed promising signs of wrongful conviction. The work was just beginning, but already they were making progress, small ripples that might eventually become waves of change. As Shadow bounded back to Marcus's side, shaking water from his coat, Marcus crouched to ruffle the dog's ears. Thank you, he whispered. Shadow responded with a slobbery kiss that made Marcus laugh despite himself. In that moment of simple joy, Marcus Johnson realized something profound. The system had taken 5 years of his life, but it hadn't taken his capacity for happiness, for purpose, or for love. He had survived not just to live, but to ensure others might be spared the injustice he had endured. Walking back along the riverside trail, with Shadow trotting ahead and sunlight warming his shoulders, Marcus felt a sense of peace that had eluded him since his release. Not completion. The work of justice was never complete, but possibility. The path forward was neither straight nor easy, but for the first time in years, it stretched before him unobstructed by prison walls. Shadow paused, looking back as if to ask why Marcus had slowed his pace. The German shepherd's unwavering loyalty had been a beacon during Marcus's darkest hours, a reminder that some bonds transcend even the most unjust separation. I'm coming, boy, Marcus called, quickening his step to rejoin his faithful companion. Together, they continued their walk beneath the open sky, 2 survivors bound by a story of injustice overcome and a future reclaimed against impossible odds. If Marcus Johnson's story moved you, remember that right now, thousands of real men and women are fighting similar battles within our justice system. Their stories deserve to be heard. Their lives matter. Their justice matters. Please subscribe to support more content that gives voice to these crucial issues. Together, we can shine a light on injustice and work toward a system that truly protects the innocent. Because like Shadow, who never forgot Marcus despite years of separation, we must never forget those still waiting for justice behind prison walls.